Hello and a very warm welcome to this week's Policy Watch, our weekly program on all the major economic developments during the week. This week has been a busy one on the macroeconomic front. The closing days saw the Cabinet opt for the ordinance route on food security. Monday, of course, was the deadline for submission of applications for new bank licenses. So that's our second story. And we finally close with the ongoing controversy that never seems to end really on the Jet-Etihad deal. Joining me in these discussions is Lekha Chakraborty, Associate Professor, NIPFP. Welcome to Policy Watch, Lekha. Food security is an imperative that no government, least of all an elected one, can afford to ignore. After months of debate had failed to elicit the necessary support across the political spectrum and ensure passage of the Food Security Bill, the UPA government finally opted for the ordinance route to deliver what has long been on its agenda and a pet project along with the Mahatma Gandhi Employment Guarantee Scheme. But before we turn to Lekha and ask her whether it was economics or politics really that was the driving force behind the decision, let's hear this Bureau report.
The UPA government finally decided to take ordinance route to implement its ambitious program to ensure food security to two-thirds of the country's population. It had considered a special session of parliament to get the bill passed, but lack of support from opposition forced its hand. After getting the president's approval, 75% rural and nearly half of urban population will be entitled to 5 kilograms of food grain per person per month. Subsidized wheat will be sold at 2 rupees per kilogram, rice at 3 rupees per kilogram and coarse grain at 1 rupee per kilogram. The UPA accused the opposition for forcing the government to take the ordinance route for this welfare measure.
देखिए, जब भी सत्र संसद का नहीं चल रहा होता है और किसी कानून को बनाना बहुत आवश्यक होता है, तो ऐसी स्थिति में संविधान ने ये अधिकार सरकार को दिया है कि वो अध्यादेश के माध्यम से उसे कानून को रूप दे सकती है। ऐसे जो भी लोग इस कानून का विरोध कर रहे हैं, वो इस देश के गरीबियों के दुश्मन हैं। गरीबों को सस्ता अनाज मिल सके, 1 रुपया किलो उनको मोटा अनाज मिल जाए, 2 रुपया किलो गेहूं मिल जाए, 3 रुपया किलो प्रति व्यक्ति के हिसाब से चावल मिल जाए, इस पर किसी को क्या विरोध होना चाहिए?
Pregnant and lactating mothers would receive a benefit of 6,000 rupees under the law. In an attempt to give more authority to women in household affairs, the ration cards will be issued in the name of the oldest woman in the household and would continue to receive 35 kilograms of food grain per month as per the earlier arrangement. The centre would bear the interstate transportation cost and give additional assistance to states if there is a shortfall of food grain. The opposition accused the government of pushing through the legislation due to political considerations.
For 4 years, this government did not think it was a priority to bring a food security legislation at a time when India has the highest number of malnourished people in the world. And now, on the eve of a parliament session, to push through an ordinance of a bill which has serious flaws is contempt of parliament, and it is also an injustice to people.
ये जल्दी में चुनाव का भूत इनके सर पर सवार है। सवाल है ना कि पूरी पार्लियामेंट के भीतर बहस होकर होना और सरकार के द्वारा होना, इसमें बहुत बड़ा फर्क है।
The government would have to get the plan cleared by the parliament within 6 weeks of the first sitting of the House after promulgation of the ordinance. The program would require 61 million tons of food, and the government's food subsidy bill is expected to be over 1.25 lakh crore, that is nearly 3% of the GDP. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Lekha, we've just heard what the government had to say and how they tried to justify it, and the opposition, of course, charging the government contrarily. So what do you think? Was there a need to resort to the ordinance route? After all, we have just less than 3 weeks left to go for Parliament for the monsoon session of Parliament, and a bill which has such serious implications, not just for now, but for the future also. Should it not have been debated in Parliament?
Yeah, you said it, Mythili. It is more political than economic. But if you look at as a public policy decision, maybe it's one of the main public policy decision in any part of the world. We are going to provide food security for 800 million people. So this public policy decision I value. because economic growth per se, it cannot translate into human development because people cannot eat GDP. So in that way, it's an important policy making. But this public policy, the biggest flaw is it has been strategic than sincere. That pushing like, in an ordinance and rushing it up, it has been more strategic than sincere. So the path they have taken is different, but that as a public policy decision, providing, food security for 800 million people, it's that governmentality I appreciate.
But given the fact that, we say we have roughly between 30-35% of the population below the poverty line, and you're trying to ensure food security for as much as 67% of the population, 75% in the rural areas. So are we not creating this climate of entitlement? Why can't you let people buy their own food, give them jobs? So that's what the government should be focusing on, isn't it?
Yes, the cash transfers, that's what...
or employment, better employment, then I wouldn't need food security. So why are we trying to, inculcate this habit, this culture of entitlement, where the government goes back to that my baap kind of regime, rather than letting people free to decide, what they wish to buy?
Yes, I think, Mythili, there are two sides of this issue. One is government as an employer of last resort. That we were, having a mixed regime in terms of the NREGA. But when it comes to the food security, I think, we need to ensure food, because employment, the kind of maybe the head of the household, we are selecting that women is going to access this food. So then such kind of decisions, instead of money, if we are providing them in kind, for me the entitlement is much better than, because it's supplementing actually the employer to last resort as well as providing, food grains.
No, but we have a similar system of food security. The public distribution system was meant to do that. And we've seen that they had numerous flaws. There was so much of leakage. You couldn't identify who was the end beneficiary. And all those flaws remain with this new scheme. And in fact, it just becomes magnified because the PDS never reached such a large number. So why don't we try to improve and get a better system then rather than repeat the same mistakes and maybe on a larger scale?
But PDS also, to me, it's a mixed scenario. Because if you look at the South Indian states, in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, it's a success story. It has impacted on, reducing the poverty to a great extent. So maybe the universality versus targeting issue comes up. I really don't know, but it's a mixed kind of a story. Maybe in the North Indian states like Bihar, in Uttar Pradesh, we need to, go further into it. But I don't think that it's a complete failure if you look at
no,
India
certainly
as a
not.
whole.
I agree with you. The South has generally performed better, but it's not as if all the North Indian states have done worse. Chhattisgarh is an outstanding example of what can be done with the same system. So why don't we just try and improve the existing system rather than have a new system which has all the flaws of the earlier one, maybe plus some more? So would that not have been a better thing? But after all, we still cannot, there is no means of identifying the beneficiary. All the leakages, that en route leakages still continue. There was hope of linking, the Aadhaar to the beneficiary, etc., etc. But nothing really has happened. So why is the government in such a rush? Should you not get the plumbing right first and then go ahead? Whereas what we've done, we've tried to superimpose the final system without having the, the foundation. You've got the superstructure, but no foundation.
I too agree that if we can link this food security to Aadhaar, nothing like it, but it takes time in terms of technological deficiency, in terms of institutional deficiency, it takes time. But this can be a good combination. Like if we can link Aadhaar to the, the cash transfers or for the food security, I go by,
Except that, Lekha, if you look at the cost, we already have a huge food subsidy bill. This year's budget pitches at about something like 90,000 crores. And if this is kind of implemented, estimates say it will go to 1,25,000 crores, 125 lakh crores as it were. So is that the right kind of, spending that you need to have? After all, we already have seen that we have a huge fiscal deficit. It's kind of manifesting itself in the current account deficit. So can we really afford it?
Yes, when it comes to the fiscal consolidation, if I look at the subsidy part, over the years, the petroleum subsidies, it has gone up like 60% per annum.
Absolutely.
But when you look at the food subsidy part, it's only 19% per annum. So when you really realign the subsidies and incorporate this food security part, I don't know, it's going to shoot up the fiscal deficit to a great extent. But in this context, I am compelled to say that deficit is good to a certain extent. But of course, it's not profligacy what I meant. But in terms of fiscal consolidation, because if you look at the fiscal rules and how the states have performed, and if you control the fiscal deficit without having a productive purpose, I really don't understand. But I'm definitely not talking about profligacy, but deficit is good in some public policy decisions.
So you think it's a pretty good decision that the government has taken.
Yes,
so at that note, I think we'll just have to take a break. But please stay with us. We will be back very soon. In the battle between planned and market economics, the latter may have won the day. But despite that, banking remains almost the only activity that's still licensed, even in economies like the US. It was inevitable, therefore, that there would be a mad scramble for bank licenses once the RBI opened the doors after the FM announced that the RBI would issue new bank licenses in his budget speech of 2010. But before we go into the detail, let's hear this bureau report.
The Reserve Bank of India received 26 applications for banking licenses before the deadline ended on Monday. RBI has issued stringent guidelines for banks' licenses. The guideline clearly defines who is eligible to promote a bank, what is fit and proper corporate structure, minimum capital requirement and voting rights. The government says the applicants would have to satisfy each criteria and it will not intervene in the process.
Entirely the RBI's call. I made it very clear. Government will have no say in the selection of the applicant who will get a bank license. Let's be absolutely clear about that. So we are not entertaining any sifarishes on behalf of anybody.
Prominent applications include big corporates such as Tata's, Birla's and the Videocon Group. Non-banking finance companies, L&T Finance, Anil Ambani's Reliance Capital, Chennai-based Shriram Capital and Bajaj Finserv have applied for licenses. Brokerage firms Religare, Edelweiss, JM Financials and two microfinance institutions and gold loan company Muthoot Finance are among the hopefuls. Public sector entities like Department of Posts, LIC Housing Finance, IDFC Limited, the Tourism Finance Corporation are also in the fray. In 1993, RBI had issued licenses to 10 players. In 2001, 2 more licenses were issued. This time, hectic lobbying is expected to take place for licenses despite the government's claim of no interference in the process. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Lekha, we just heard that despite the mad scramble initially for licenses, the RBI finally got only 26. In 1993, when they first opened up, they got about 113 applications and they issued only 10. So why do you think there was, despite all the hype, why was there less interest in terms of number of applications?
I really don't know what's the magic behind this number, but what worries me is the details. This 26 applicants, if you look at, if you categorize, the corporate, the big industrial houses, they are getting into the banking sector like Ambani's Reliance, then you have this Tata and Birla, and also you have these NBFCs. I'm thinking about the Ponzi finance they are going to create once again. And the third category is...
And you also have Mr. Birla sitting on the RBI Central Board.
Of course, that is conflict of interest. So these 3 categories are, a little worrying me whether what they really intend is financial inclusion. Because it's a large bank or a large number of banks, because we heard that Chidambaram, the finance minister, he told that there is no cap in the number of licenses. But at the same time, RBI governor, he clearly mentioned that we are not going to issue licenses for all eligible candidates. So there is a conflict between what we heard from the FinMin and what we are hearing from the RBI. So really there is a kind of ambiguity. And then when it comes to the requirements, maybe that's one of the things which stall the process, because the requirement is 1 in 4 banks you have to open in a rural. So that's an expensive thing, that penetration. And second point, you have to keep a certain amount of deposits, like 3% with RBI and 24% with the government bonds. So this kind of requirement is there. So it's a kind of preemption of the loanable funds. From the very first day onwards, you are required to keep a certain amount of your deposits with. But bank ultimately, instead of financial inclusion, if they go for margin, if they go for profitability more than the financial inclusion aspects, expansion of branches aspects, I really don't know. But India is largely unbanked, so this is a welcome step. We are going for more new licenses, but the way in which it's going to proceed, because when I look at the category of applicants, I am really.
But corporates always say that, why are you always painting us as black sheep? It is not necessarily that we are all going to run away with the money. And RBI has its own safeguards, does its own due diligence. But between the two objectives, financial inclusion and greater competition, after all, these corporates will bring the best of technology. You will have deep pockets. They'll have the necessary wherewithal to give you the very modern banking. So between these two, increased competition, newer products that you and I can enjoy, and financial inclusion, what do you think the RBI should focus on?
Yeah, Mythili, it's conflicting because you're focusing on financial inclusion, financial innovation, the competition. So for me, it's a financial inclusion.
It's the most important.
It's more because the poor are bankable clients. Their problem is access to credit. It's not the cost of credit. So when the Ponzi finance happens, it's like a high rate of interest. They are doing the Ponzi finance with the indigenous bad lemons, the indigenous money lenders. So it's access to credit more than the cost of credit is what poor wants. So for me, it's financial inclusion.
Okay, so if you're going by financial inclusion being the most important, then which of the various applicants would you think is the best place?
That's what is worrying me, because I don't know. The first category is a state-run, the sponsored IDFC, because they are going for mega projects. They can finance mega projects. Then the second is our corporate industrial houses.
No, what about India Post? You forgot about
India Post. Yes, it may be hopeful.
Yes, because they have the widest reach inside into the interior. So would you think India Post, the postal department, stands a good chance? Will government corporatize it? What is your sense of that?
Theoretically, yes, but I don't know the empirical evidence. Theoretically, it should be.
Okay.
Yes, but I'm not hopeful about NBFCs because of Ponzi finance, which has happened quite a bit. But I'm not hopeful about the profit-motivated industrial houses. So,
no, but I thought when we moved to market-based economy and we had economic reforms, we thought that profit is not a bad word, provided the profit is earned ethically and it's used.
Of course, if the bank run in loss for more than a year, we won't deposit there. But when it comes to the question of bank-based or market-based, the bank-based economy, it is because of that,
ultimately, we've seen that whenever banks fail, ultimately it is taxpayer money that goes to bail them out.
The global financial crisis, as we were bank-based more than market-based,
So regardless of whether it is government-owned or private-owned, ultimately when push comes to shove, it is taxpayer money that finally goes into bailing these out. So, but the RBI has taken various precautions, apart from saying, they will decide who is fit and proper, and they've been very careful in saying that the RBI will be the final arbiter, though there is an expert panel which will decide who is eligible and who is not. The RBI will take the final decision. And they said, we will decide who is fit and proper, and our decision cannot be questioned. So do you think we can, trust the central bank? Because after all, central banks are the repository of public trust. So can we trust RBI to take the right decision for us? Or do you worry that there could be political interests?
Yeah, Mythili, for a moment, even if I trust the central bank, you just imagine the conflicting objectives they have. Inflation,
yes,
what all things RBI can do.
I'll have to stop you there, Lekha, but we will come back. We just slip into a very short break, but we'll be back with you to discuss the last story of this week. Welcome back. The week also saw a lot of activity in the aviation space. The latest entrant into the domestic aviation space, Air Asia's Tony Fernandes, was in the capital to meet the Civil Aviation Minister and, of course, lobby for his proposed low-cost airline, a joint venture with the Tatas and Arun Bhatia of Telstra Trade Place. However, the spotlight really throughout the week was on the Jet-Etihad deal. It's been in the eye of the storm ever since the day it was first announced. Why is this deal so controversial? Let's hear this bureau report.
Abu Dhabi's national carrier Etihad's 2,058 crore rupees deal to pick up 24% stake in Jet Airways has run into some serious trouble. The deal was the first foreign direct investment into an Indian domestic carrier. FDI up to 49% is allowed in civil aviation. However, the deal is being looked into by various regulators such as SEBI, FIPB and Competition Commission of India. SEBI and FIPB have sought more information on the ownership structure of Jet Airways, which is 51% owned by NRI businessman Naresh Goyal. FIPB recently deferred a decision on the deal. The signing of the deal also coincided with the news that India would grant up to 40,000 additional seats per week to Abu Dhabi under a new seat-sharing agreement. Several members of parliament have written to the Prime Minister questioning the seat-sharing agreement and also the Jet-Etihad deal. Civil Aviation Minister Ajit Singh has strongly defended the deal. The news of the deal made headlines, prompting the PMO to issue clarifications, saying there were no differences with the Aviation Minister on the issue. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Lekha, we've seen, so many scams, so much of controversy, so many stories about corruption. Have we become very suspicious and cynical as a result, so that we're always saying something suspicious in every deal that happens? Why is the Jet-Etihad deal so controversial?
Mythili, more than this FDI stake, between Etihad and Jet Airways, what was worrisome is what has happened as a prelude to this, that bilateral,
the air service agreement, yes.
Air service agreement which happened between our government and UAE. So these kind of supplementary things which happened in a rush, this is what is worrying more than FDI stake per se. But when it comes to the FDI in aviation sector, it's unfortunate that our debate is focused only on airlines. Aviation is not just airlines. So if it can be extended to infrastructure, if it can be extended to avionics or other capacity, in that way the debate is not happening. It's only with regard to the airlines. But regarding that stake, Arvind has just submitted the report, the DEA secretary. Yes, and in that we can see that he is going for a hike in the stake for sector-specific caps. He's going even to 79. But when it comes to the aviation sector, if you do cross-country, even in US, they're scared to,
No, I think the worry here, Lekha, really was that, that because Jet's shares were being bought at a premium, was this bilateral deal done as a sweetener to persuade Etihad to buy Jet, and who benefits? So I think these were all the questions that were raised, which is why it has gone to the PMO. And the PMO has raised a number of queries which the Civil Aviation Minister now has to answer. So I think there's a need for greater transparency, don't you think, in this?
Of course. The transparency of the deal, I do suspect. But I think that nowhere, whether it's Canada, whether it is America, or whether it is any other nations, they won't go for, this kind of stake, especially in the aviation sector. So I really don't know, other than Australia, which is a nation which gone for a kind of a stake in aviation, such an important sector. So that's a question,
So there's still lots of unanswered questions at the end of it.
Of course,
so I think that I'll have to thank you. We've come almost to the end of this program.
Sure.
But before we conclude, let's take a look at the key takeaways from the three main stories that we discussed today. As far as food security is concerned, Lekha just doesn't share my skepticism. She feels that in a country that's as poor as ours, food security is very important. On banks, she has serious doubts about corporates and the need for the RBI to be very, very cautious in giving them licenses. And as far as the Jet-Etihad deal is concerned, I think both of us agree that we need much greater transparency, and there are many questions for which we still haven't got the answers. And on that note, I think we come to the end of this program. Thank you for being with us, but please don't forget, we'll be back same time next week. Till then, it's goodbye from Mythili.